They were once seen as the royalty of the religious world. Bishop Clarence McClendon and Tammera, a dynamic duo commanding pulpits and packing megachurches. From powerful sermons to praise-filled arenas, they stood side by side, preaching purpose and power. But while the world saw godly union behind closed doors, another story was quietly unfolding, one not of miracles, but manipulation. And when the cameras turned off, so did the illusion. Now, the veil has been lifted, and what's being revealed is far darker than anyone imagined. Legal battles, allegations of control, a marriage fractured by betrayal and buried truths. This isn't just another church scandal, it's a cautionary tale of what happens when faith, fame, and unchecked power collide. Buckle up, because the truth about Bishop McClendon and Tammera might just shake the very foundation of everything you thought you knew about power couples in the pulpit. It's the kind of story that flips the whole narrative. Everything you thought you knew about Bishop Clarence McClendon and his rise to religious royalty gets thrown into question. Behind the designer suits, the anointed sermons, and the packed sanctuaries was a private world unraveling in silence. His marriage to Tammera McClendon, once hailed as a holy partnership, crumbled into a storm of infidelity whispers, legal battles, and deeply buried secrets. And what's even more shocking, the church stayed silent. The empire kept moving. And Bishop McClendon? He simply turned the page, remarried, and kept preaching like nothing ever happened. But the truth didn't disappear. In fact, it's been quietly gathering momentum through court documents, insider testimony, and broken relationships that never healed. So what really brought their marriage down? Was it pride, control, spiritual abuse, or something far more sinister that the public was never meant to see? In this video, we dig deep into the scandal that shook the gospel world, exposing the red flags that were missed, the pain that was masked behind polished pulpits, and how one of the most influential figures in Black church culture continues to lead while leaving behind a trail of questions no one dares to ask. Until now, we've unearthed facts and insider knowledge that have never been completely revealed, so you'll want to stay until the very end. And believe me, things get messy at this point. Now take a seat, press the like button, and let's explore the true story of Bishop Clarence McClendon and his former spouse, Tammera. Because a broken marriage isn't the only issue here. It has to do with faith, image, power, and all the things in between. There was a promising beginning long before the accusations, long before the public backlash, and long before the headlines. Clarence McClendon wasn't always a nationally televised megachurch preacher. He was a brilliant young man with a passion for the Bible and a vision for ministry who, like many leaders in the Black Pentecostal movement, came from modest roots. Clarence first started to make an impression on the gospel community in the early 1990s. In addition to his theological depth and charm, he possessed an unmistakable theatrical presence. His impact developed along with his ministry. He gained notoriety for his impassioned preaching, messages of prosperity, and his scathing, nearly Hollywood-like appearance. However, it is said that every great man has a wonderful lady behind him. Let's introduce Tammera McClendon. Tammera was more than just the spouse of Bishop McClendon. He had her as a co-pilot. According to those close to the ministry at the time, Tammera played a key role in assisting him in creating his early church empire. From women's ministry to administrative leadership, Tammera provided the expanding church audience with warmth, relatability, and balance. They were frequently spotted together as a pair at religious functions, conferences, and even media appearances. They were linked in Christ, powerful, purpose-driven, and intricately knit. Together, they even organized marriage seminars where they gave advice to other couples on the value of God in relationships, the sanctity of marriage, and spiritual intimacy. They were seen by many as the ideal of a virtuous partnership. Additionally, Clarence frequently gave sermons on the value of respecting one's wife, keeping one's word, and running the home in a way that is consistent with the Bible. However, as their ministry expanded, flaws started to appear, first subtle, then more difficult to ignore. Congregants started chatting among themselves about Tammera's growing lack of attendance at Sunday services. She became quieter and more aloof, according to others, and then the church leadership abruptly changed. Tammera has stopped playing prominent roles. Flyers for the event gradually stopped mentioning her. She was reportedly quite dissatisfied behind the scenes, not only with the church, but also with the man she had thought God had given her. Nevertheless, no public announcement had been made, and everything appeared to be okay to outsiders. All of that was going to change though. They don't want you to know the surprising part though. With litigation, rumors, and a highly publicized divorce imminent, the formerly gorgeous image of this power couple would entirely collapse in a matter of months. Every high-profile divorce has a backstory that is typically kept under wraps, particularly in positions of church leadership. However, even before the formal announcement, insiders started to notice that Bishop Clarence McClendon and his then-wife Tammera were having major problems. Bishop McClendon was at the top of his game by the early 2000s. Through Trinity Broadcasting Network, or TBN, he had entered the national limelight, garnering a sizable television viewership and extending his impact much beyond his local church. On the outside, his ministry was flourishing, but at home, things were subtly falling apart. Subtle but unsettling clues started to surface from people close to the McClendons. According to reports, Tammera was growing more and more distant from decisions made by the church's leadership. Former members claimed that she wasn't even consulted on important ministry decisions and was gradually removed from important events. This is how one former elder explained the change. She seemed to be being obliterated. Before she abruptly disappeared, she was the center of our women's ministry. The lack of transparency, however, was what made this even more agonizing. The reason for Tammera's absence was not disclosed to the church. Just silence, no acknowledgments, no statements. Rumors began to circulate as a result, and they did. Despite Tammera's own lack of public confirmation at the time, accusations of manipulation, emotional distancing, and control started to circulate. But one thing was for sure, she didn't appear to be the happy, determined lady she used to be. Then the shocking news arrived. The fact that Tammera had filed for divorce was made public in 2000. It stunned the Christian community. The McClendons had been admired by many as a model of a virtuous marriage, but suddenly, the whole thing had fallen apart. More startling, though, was how fast Bishop McClendon moved on. Bishop McClendon married Priscilla Delgado a week after the divorce was finalized. Additionally, many people who had backed the McClendons during their ascent found the optics to be absolutely heartbreaking. Take a moment to consider that. A week. This 16-year marriage wasn't a respectful time of grieving or a quiet transition. No, it was abrupt, quick, and quite divisive. More significantly, how did Tammera feel about being replaced so quickly? Many started to wonder, was this marriage planned before the divorce was even finalized? Had there been something going on in the background? This timeline has been the subject of passionate dispute within the religious community to this day. Some rationalize McClendon's behavior by claiming that God had freed him from that commitment and that he had been suffering in quiet. Others in the congregation, especially the ladies, felt deceived not only for Tammera, but also because they had emotionally engaged in the McClendons' collective goal. The reasons for the formal separation were not fully disclosed in the divorce's public court filings. Nevertheless, the remarrying's rapidity caused concerns worldwide. Through his ministry team, Bishop McClendon gave succinct, rehearsed comments asserting that God had given him the ability to proceed and that he was fulfilling his divine mission. However, many people found these claims to be unconvincing and a well-polished way to defend dubious timing. Tammera, meantime, decided to keep quiet. She completely avoided the limelight, never giving interviews or voicing personal complaints. Many people still view her silence as strength rather than weakness, as the calm dignity of a lady who refrained from fighting a public battle. This is where things become even more difficult though. In addition to being remarried, McClendon's new wife started playing the exact same part Tammera had played. It seemed like history was being repeated, albeit with a different woman, and it was anticipated that the congregation would continue as if nothing had occurred. The Christian community, particularly the Black church community, was rocked by uncertainty, wrath, and disbelief following the abrupt divorce and even more abrupt remarriage. Bishop Clarence McClendon had established himself for years as more than just a preacher. He was a moral compass, a model of integrity, spiritual discipline, and godly leadership. However, many of his own followers started to doubt things when it was revealed that he had only been married to someone else a week after divorcing Tammera. Did this man who preached covenant and commitment really walk the walk? Did he step out on his wife emotionally or even physically before? Was the question that church officials, members, and viewers of his national television program were left to wonder. Bishop McClendon insisted in subsequent interviews that he had not committed adultery, but the optics told a different story, and perception is everything, especially in ministry. His remarriage timing felt to many like a betrayal of both trust and transparency. If the divorce was finalized, what did that say about the spiritual foundation of his entire ministry? Online discussion erupted, and Christian commentators, gospel blogs, and spiritual leaders didn't hold back. Some referred to it as a spiritual scandal, while others went further and accused Bishop McClendon of abusing his position to further his own agenda, using God's name to defend choices that would have destroyed the ministry of the average man. Even former members of his Reformation Church of Los Angeles started to voice their opinions. According to reports, some members left the congregation in protest, believing that the church had shifted its focus from Christ to performance and control. The lack of accountability made matters worse. Despite the public controversy, there was no official church discipline, no sabbatical, and no attempt at reconciliation with Tammera. The situation became even more complicated when Bishop McClendon continued to preach and host his TV shows as if nothing had happened. The spiritual community was split, but mega pastors and famous Christian leaders mostly said nothing. Many of them who had previously shared stages with Bishop McClendon and others who had developed whole platforms on the value of biblical marriage didn't publicly address the issue. The public was watching, and many were not buying the silence. TBN quietly started lowering Bishop McClendon's visibility behind the scenes, and his influence on some Christian networks waned. Some claim it was because they didn't want to judge a fellow human being, while others think it was just about safeguarding their own brand alliances and business ties. In a 2005 interview, McClendon briefly addressed the controversy, saying he had been unfairly criticized and that people were passing judgment without knowing the whole story. His reputation, once nearly untouchable in the gospel world, had taken a hit from which some claim he never fully recovered, but he still had a devoted following of supporters. And as for Tammera, her silence continued to speak volumes. She never defended herself against assumptions or responded to public criticism. But her absence, her dignity, and her refusal to engage became a quiet symbol of grace and strength, especially among Christian women who had once looked up to her. He insisted that he was walking in accordance with divine timing and that his new marriage was a blessing from God, but many were not convinced. This is where things take a darker turn. Years after her departure from the pulpit, accusations surfaced that McClendon had developed a pattern of controlling behaviors in leadership, especially toward women. Some even started online support forums inspired by her, discussing how to recover spiritually and emotionally after betrayal in ministry marriages. The allegations, which never resulted in formal charges or public investigations, contributed to the perception that McClendon's style of ministry may have placed a higher priority on power than accountability. A number of former staff and members, both male and female, described a culture where questioning leadership was discouraged and loyalty to McClendon was expected above all else. Let's start with Bishop Clarence McClendon. Following the controversy surrounding his divorce and remarriage, Bishop McClendon did what many public figures attempt to do. He rebranded. Now that the dust has settled and the headlines have subsided, you may be wondering where they are now and what happened to Tammera, the woman who used to stand by him. He made a concerted effort to restore his reputation through his online platforms, international missions, and television ministry. He continued to lead the Church of the Harvest in Los Angeles, and later the Place of Grace, a rebranded version of his ministry. His wife, Priscilla Delgado McClendon, took Tammera's place and was frequently seen with him at conferences, on broadcasts, and in social media posts. Together, they persisted in promoting the brand of prosperity teaching, healing, prophecy, and spirit-led leadership. But the stain of the past never completely went away. And although McClendon maintained a core group of devoted followers, the larger gospel and Christian community remained wary. In other words, he was never canceled, but he was never the same. Now, let's talk about Tammera. Unlike Clarence, Tammera completely removed herself from the public eye. Invitations to major Christian television events and national platforms became more selective, and his appearances on TBN decreased. The controversy surrounding his personal life had become a permanent part of his spiritual resume. There are no high-profile interviews, no tell-all memoirs, no retaliation, just silence and resilience. Those close to her have described her as a woman who found peace outside of the platform, someone who shifted her focus toward healing, faith, and helping others behind the scenes. She appears to have chosen a path of private healing and personal growth after years of being in the spotlight, standing on stages, serving in women's ministry, and traveling with her husband. Even in her silence, Tammera became a silent example of what it looks like to rebuild your life after betrayal. Not with bitterness, but with grace and boundaries. Rumor had it that she pursued personal counseling and later started helping women going through similar experiences, but never publicly, never with the need for revenge or validation. Her exit revealed the toxic pedestal many churches place on pastors and their spouses, a dynamic that can crush the very people it claims to uplift. Her story has had a lasting impact, though, as many women who had once idolized the McClendon marriage said the breakup forced them to reevaluate what kingdom relationships really mean and whether the church is doing enough to hold male leaders accountable when they fail morally or emotionally. Tammera's story gave voice to the voiceless, not because she spoke loudly, but because she endured visibly. Other people also started to speak up, sharing their own experiences of being forgotten, shamed, or silenced in ministry marriages where power dynamics were unbalanced. And then, there's the broader spiritual dialogue this story sparked. Almost 20 years later, the McClendon divorce is still brought up in discussions about church transparency, spiritual abuse, and leadership ethics. It forced pastors, bishops, and gospel influencers to confront difficult questions, such as, can someone preach deliverance while privately walking in dishonor? How can churches support spouses who are discarded or silenced after divorce? And here's the emotional kicker. Did Bishop McClendon ever apologize to Tammera? Not in a public or formal manner, and not in a way that the innumerable women and men who felt deceived by what transpired could see or hear. It's no longer just about two people and a failed marriage. It's about a system that permitted it to happen with little to no accountability. So, after removing all the layers, the rise, the fall, the backlash, and the silence, what are we really left with? A story that isn't just about a bishop and his ex-wife, but about something much deeper: how power can corrupt, how image can be mistaken for integrity, and how even in the holiest places, people can still be deeply flawed. There is still no clear answer to this question, only speculation, but for many, the damage had already been done. Tammera McClendon, a woman who quietly walked away from it all, is on the other side of the storm. Bishop Clarence McClendon may have rebuilt his platform, continued preaching, and moved on with his life, but questions remain about both his choices and the structure of the modern church that permitted them to remain uncontested. Her story is more than just tabloid gossip for the church world. It's a cautionary tale that makes us ask, what does true accountability look like in ministry? Are we elevating leaders to such a high level that they forget they're human? Most importantly, are we defending the institution of marriage or the brand of Christianity? She chose peace rather than retaliation with words, tearing down her ex-husband in public and seeking fame from her suffering. The man behind the microphone? One thing is certain, regardless of how you feel about the conclusion, when the truth eventually comes to light, it reveals not just who someone claims to be, but who they have always been. Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Did Bishop McClendon act with spiritual integrity in handling the situation? Did the church and the public treat Tammera fairly? What lessons can the faith community learn from their story? This isn't just tea, this is real life, real consequences, and real healing. Thank you for watching, and until the next time, keep asking questions, keep praying, and keep searching for the truth. If this video gave you a new perspective, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear the truth behind the headlines.